Charles Pace and I'm from Exclusive Tackle. We've put together a series of short clips to demonstrate the very basics of rod building. We all know how much fun it is to go build a rod and then catch a fish on something you built yourself. So with that in mind, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is determine the spine of the blank. The spine of the blank is basically the element of the blank that we need to determine to know where to put the guides and the reel seat. When building a fishing rod, we need to understand where the strength of our materials are so that we know and we design our rod around those strengths. When a rod is under load, and by under load I mean you've got a good fish or a good bend in the rod and the rod's working hard, the rod will want to sit in the strongest part of its curve. And if it isn't, if we don't design the rod around the spine of the rod, when it's under load, when it counts the most, and you're on a fish, the rod may want to twist in your hand, twist into its strongest position. So that's by doing this step, we can eliminate that. So to get started, first thing we need a rod blank, and we need a hard, smooth surface. In this case, I'm going to use a plate on top of the table so that you can see what I'm doing. But in a normal scenario, a tiled floor is ideal. On a two-piece blank, we're going to first find the spine of the top half of the rod. So what we do is, we have to put the blank under load. Now by putting under load, I mean pushing down with my left hand, and I'm pushing down with my left hand and up with my right hand. And that will put this tip under load, this top section. And then I will, with my left hand, I'm going to spin this blank around. And I'm going to spin it around and look and feel for where it wants to get stuck. It will stop at a certain point, and it will be hard to spin it out of that point. Now that point that it's hard to spin out of, or the part that, i.e. the part that it wants to stop at, that is actually the spine. The spine is the natural resting spot. It's very common for blanks to have two separate spines. What you're looking for is the most prominent spine. It will have one that is stronger than the other. And the one that is harder to spin the blank out of is the one that's the most prominent one. So here we go. See, that's wanted to rest there. I'll spin it again, and there it goes. Rest again. Same at the one point. This blank happens to have only one spine, which makes it a bit easier. If it had two, I'd be trying to spin it in and out of both spines to see which one is the strongest one. But clearly, that is the strongest spine. That is the spine there. So here you can see the marking that I've put on the blank, where I think the spine is. Now I'm going to twist it with my hand, and you'll see how it pops back into that same spot. Twist it again. That didn't work that time. So twist it again. There you go. Pop back in. I'll go the other way. Pops back into the same spot. So we've found the spine of the top section of the blank. And now we need to try and find the spine of the bottom section so that we've got a whole blank on the right spine. So the way we do that is that we put these two together now, and we roll it around and see where the resulting spine is. So this will have a spine. We know this spine's there, and we'll see where the average of those spines are, and then we'll turn these around to find where both spines actually align, and I'll show you what I mean. So I've put it in any position, connected the two. Now I'll put this into a working curve, and I'll make sure that the bottom half of the rod is actually working as well. And you'll see how the spine of the two has the top section off its spine. So I will twist that around just a bit, and do the same process again. And now the the resulting spine of the two is, I've gone a little bit too far, so I'll move it back. What I'm trying to achieve is to have the spine of the top aligned to the spine of the whole rod. And that's done it. So now when I spin the two together, the spine of the top is equal to the spine of the bottom, and we've found the spine of the whole blank. So what I'll do from here is put some masking tape around that and mark the bottom half of the blank where the spine is. With the rod, we have found that the rod wants to sit in that position when it's loaded. And that means that if I'm building a spinning rod where the guides are on the underside of the rod, the reel seat will be on the inside of the curve and the guides will be on the inside of the curve here. But if you're building an overhead rod, obviously the guides and the reel seat are on the other side. So with an overhead rod, the reel seat will sit on this side of the curve and the guides will sit on this side of the curve. And that's how we find the spine. I'm Charles Pace and I'm from Exclusive Tackle. We've put together a series of short clips to demonstrate the very basics of rod building. We all know how much fun it is to go build a rod and then catch a fish on something you built yourself. So with that in mind, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is determine the spine of the blank. The spine of the blank is basically the element of the blank that we need to determine to know where to put the guides and the reel seat. When building a fishing rod, we need to understand where the strength of our materials are so that we know and we design our rod around those strengths. When a rod is under load, and by under load I mean you've got a good fish or a good bend in the rod and the rod's working hard, the rod will want to sit in the strongest part of its curve. And if it isn't, if we don't design the rod around the spine of the rod, when it's under load, when it counts the most, and you're on a fish, the rod may want to twist in your hand, twist into its strongest position. So that's by doing this step, we can eliminate that. So to get started, firstly we need a rod blank, and we need a hard, smooth surface. In this case, I'm going to use a plate on top of the table so that you can see what I'm doing. But in a normal scenario, a tiled floor is ideal. On a two-piece blank, we're going to first find the spine of the top half of the rod. So what we do is, we have to put the blank under load. Now by putting under load, I mean pushing down with my left hand, and I'm pushing down with my left hand and up with my right hand. And that will put this tip under load, this top section. And then I will, with my left hand, I'm going to spin this blank around, and I'm going to spin it around and look and feel for where it wants to get stuck. It will stop at a certain point, and it will be hard to spin it out of that point. Now that point that it's hard to spin out of, or the part that, i.e. the part that it wants to stop at, that is actually the spine. The spine is the natural resting spot. It's very common for blanks to have two separate spines. What you're looking for is the most prominent spine. It will have one that is stronger than the other. And the one that is harder to spin the blank out of is the one that's the most prominent one. So here we go. See, that's wanted to rest there. I'll spin it again. And there it goes, rest again, same at the one point. This blank happens to have only one spine, which makes it a bit easier. If it had two, I'd be trying to spin it in and out of both spines to see which one is the strongest one. But clearly that is the strongest spine, that is the spine there. So here you can see the marking that I've put on the blank, where I think the spine is. Now I'm going to twist it with my hand, and you'll see how it pops back into that same spot. Twist it again. That didn't work that time. So twist it again. There you go. Pop back in. I'll go the other way. Pops back into the same spot. So we've found the spine of the top section of the blank. And now we need to try and find the spine of the bottom section so that we've got a whole blank on the right spine. So the way we do that is that we put these two together now, and we roll it around and see where the resulting spine is. So this will have a spine. We know this spine's there, and we'll see where the average of those spines are, and then we'll turn these around to find where both spines actually align, and I'll show you what I mean. So I've put it in any position, connected the two. Now I'll put this into a working curve, and I'll make sure that the bottom half of the rod is actually working as well, and you'll see how the spine of the two has the top section off its spine. So I will twist that around just a bit, and do the same process again. And now the resulting spine of the two is, I've gone a little bit too far, so I'll move it back. What I'm trying to achieve is to have the spine of the top aligned to the spine of the whole rod. And that's done it. So now when I spin the two together, the spine of the top is equal to the spine of the bottom, and we've found the spine of the whole blank. So what I'll do from here is put some masking tape around that, and mark the bottom half of the blank where the spine is. With the rod, we have found that the rod wants to sit in that position when it's loaded. And that means that if I'm building a spinning rod where the guides are on the underside of the rod, the reel seat will be on the inside of the curve and the guides will be on the inside of the curve here. But if you're building an overhead rod, obviously the guides and the reel seat are on the other side. So with an overhead rod, the reel seat will sit on this side of the curve and the guides will sit on this side of the curve. And that's how we find the spine. This is part 2 in the basics of rod building. We'll be focusing on the installation of the rear grip and the butt cap. But before I do, I'm going to explain a little bit about the use of arbors and how we construct them. Before we assemble the handle kit, I'm going to show you a little bit about grip sizes and the use of arbors. So we use arbors when the handle kit item is larger than the outside diameter of the blank, and I'll demonstrate. So this is a grip which has quite a large diameter, and when I put this down the blank, this is a rear grip, there's about a 3mm gap. Now that's too big for this blank, but if we needed to use that grip, we would use arbors, which are basically tape. We'll wrap tape around the blank to fill that gap, and then glue over that tape, and I'll demonstrate that later. Now, this is a grip that is too tight. It gets stuck on the blank about there, so halfway down. There's no way you'd ever get that to the bottom. You might get it down to about here if you push really hard with some lubricant. So if you need to use a grip like this, that I had this that was this tight, you would need to remount the center with a reaming kit, which is basically like a long screwdriver, if you like, but with sanded thread on it, so that you can make that bore bigger, and that would allow it to come further down. This is a grip which has a perfect fit for this blank. So it gets stuck there, and with pressure and lubricant we will bring that down to where it needs to be, which is towards the end of the blank. So there are the three scenarios on when you would use no arbors, or with this one you would use an arbor because there's a big gap, or you would need to ream this one because the bore just isn't big enough. Now we're going to get started with the handle kit. On the spine of the blank, and now we're going to assemble the handle kit. So the first thing I did was I had marked the spine of the blank on the bottom half, and I will be working towards that marking the whole time. Now to assemble the handle kit, we firstly need to mark out the separate components on the blank. So here is the blank with the markings on it. The butt cap goes to here, the rear grip goes to this mark, the reel seat goes to there, and the foregrip goes to that mark. So now we need to etch on the blank with some sandpaper to enable the handle kit glue to adhere to the blank properly. With some coarse sandpaper, I'm going to score the blank only where the handle kit is, not above the handle kit, because we'll see that later on. And then I'm going to give it a quick clean with some methylated spirits. You don't want any residue or any of the sanding dust on the blank. And now we're ready to install the rear grip and the butt cap. This is part 3 in the basics of rod building, and in this segment we'll be installing the rear grip and the butt cap. Now we're ready to glue our handle kit together, and for that we use the handle kit epoxy gel, which is a super strong gel that mixes in a 1:1 ratio. So just by sight I've mixed two what look like equal portions. I'll give that a bit of a mix. Okay, so we've mixed the gel. Now I'll apply a little bit to the end, because the first thing we do is put the butt cap on. Like so. Now I'll wipe off the excess with a rag with methylated spirits on it. Next step is to put on the rear grip. So we've got it marked here from before. I'll just double check the marking where the rear grip comes to, so I'll double check it. So now I'm going to apply gel where the rear grip goes, but I won't go past the rear grip. It's important just to put glue where it's needed for now, because we need to put arbors in the next section for the reel seat. Now I'm just putting glue onto the blank where the rear grip goes. You can always put a fair bit on, but you can always take it off after. And I won't put much on the very bottom section, because when I slide the grip down it will push glue onto there. Okay, so this is ready for me to put the rear grip on. The first thing I'll do though is I will pour some methylated spirits down here, down into the inside the grip, and then tip it out. And that will act as a lubricant to allow me to pull the grip down the rod. Slide the grip down the blank. It's important to do this in one section and not stop, so you push and you keep going. There you go. You wipe the excess with methylated spirits. Like so. This is part 4 in the basics of rod building. In this segment, we're going to install the reel seat. Now both the butt cap and the rear grip in this instance were snug fits. So we didn't need to use any arbors, we could glue them straight onto the blank, which is great. Now for the next section, which is the reel seat there's a fair sized gap between the reel seat and the blank. So to make that nice and firm, we need to use arbors. So the simplest arbor that we can use is the one using tape, and I'll show you how to do that now. Now I'm going to create some tape arbors, and they will bridge the gap, as I said before, between the blank and the reel seat. And it's as simple as just rolling the tape around the blank. Try and keep the tape nice and centered and quite firm. So that needs a fair bit more. When we create the arbors, we're just using plain old masking tape. So I'll repeat this process, and I'll leave about a 6mm gap in between arbors, and I'll show you what that looks like. So now I've put 4 arbors in of tape, which, as you can see, are only about 5mm apart, 6mm apart, and they allow the reel seat to sit snugly over the arbors. Not too hard, but just nice and snug. And now the reel seat's ready for gluing. The reel seat can sit either way. It can sit with the screw of the reel seat facing down, or it can sit with the screw facing up. It really comes down to personal preference. Before we glue, I'm going to wrap some tape around each end of the reel seat so that when the glue comes out of the crack between the reel seat and the foregrip, the glue doesn't touch the reel seat itself. So first I'll screw the locking nut all the way up to get it out of the way, and I'll put some tape around the thread of the reel seat. Just like that. Okay, so now we're ready to put the glue on. So the same handle kit gel that we had before, I'm just going to make sure it fills all those gaps. Like that. Now we're ready to put the reel seat on. Just wipe off the excess glue, give that a wipe before it gets too far in. There we go. Now I'm just going to wipe that glue with methylated spirits on a rag. And now I can take off that tape, and the reel seat should be nice and clean. There we go. This is part 5 in the basics of rod building. In this segment, we're going to install the foregrip. Now we need to put on the foregrip. So we'll just try the foregrip on. So the foregrip isn't as snug a fit as the butt cap or the rear grip. It's actually quite loose. So that's going to need an arbor as well. It's probably only about 3mm gap on each side, but we should still use an arbor. Otherwise the glue won't hold properly, and more importantly the foregrip won't be even on the blank. So I'll start putting arbors every 5 to 6mm up the blank until I get to the section where I've marked where the foregrip ends. So I've just put in 4 arbors where the foregrip goes. So I marked the foregrip, I knew where the end is, I put an arbor on each end and then spaced out the arbors in the middle, so there's about a 6mm gap between them all. And there's a snug fit as the foregrip passes over each of the arbors, like so. So now we're ready to put the glue on for the foregrip. So I'll take the foregrip off and apply some more handle kit epoxy gel. Now take special care to make sure that you fill in all the gaps in between the arbors with glue, because they are the strong points where the foregrip will actually be connecting directly to the blank. Okay, I'll get my cloth ready because I'll need to wipe up some excess glue in a second. So now, just carefully push the foregrip down. I like to wipe up a bit of excess glue before it actually hits the reel seat. And push it the rest of the way. And there you have it. Now I just have to wipe up the glue. So I've wiped off the remaining glue with methylated spirits, and now I'm going to remove the masking tape. And there we have it. The handle kit has been glued together. Now one important step we need to remember before we put this down for the handle kit epoxy gel to dry is to center the reel seat onto the spine. So before, when we checked the spine, I had actually marked the inside of the curve. Remember, this is for a spinning rod. The inside of the curve, which is exactly the same side that the reel seat must be situated on. So my reel seat is off by about 10 degrees. So while the handle kit epoxy gel is still soft, I will just adjust the reel seat to be perfectly in line with the mark I made. And now that handle kit is finished. We just need to give it 24 hours and then we'll be ready to start with the guides. This is part 6 in the basics of rod building. And in this segment we will be installing the tip and talking a little bit about the guides. In segment 1 we determined the spine, and in segment 2 we assembled the handle kit. So now the next step is to put the tip on. I've marked, as you recall, this top half of the blank is already marked with the spine. So now I just need to affix the tip in line with that spine. Now remember that spine is marked on the underside of the curve of the rod, and because this is a spinning rod, the guides and the tip will be on that underside. So I'll be aligning the tip with that mark I made in segment 1. So to affix the tip to the blank, you want a tip that fits snugly over the end of the blank, and not so tight so there's not enough room for glue, but not so loose either. So what we need to do, we grab our tip adhesive and a lighter, and we heat up the end of the tip adhesive until it turns into a soft, runny wax. like so, and then we apply it to the end of the blank. We put some on the inside of the tip like so. So the first time you put it on, it's probably not going to be perfectly aligned to where you want it, but that's okay because we can heat it up in a moment and just do a fine tune. So bear in mind that when you've heated up that glue is hot and can burn you, so just don't touch it while it's still wet. I've let that glue dry a little bit, just for about 15 seconds, that's all it takes. And there's some excess glue on the end of the tip, and I'm just going to flick that off with my fingernails and clean it up a little bit. And now I just want to reheat it, soften the glue, and just turn the tip so that it's perfectly in line with the spine that I'd marked earlier. There we go. The tip is on and it's in the right position. Next step is to choose the guides and determine the spacing of those guides along the blank. Now if you're building a rod kit supplied by us, we will already have chosen the guides, how many you need of each size, and we will also supply you with the spacings on where to position those guides on the blank. The measurements that we supply are all measurements from the tip, so bear that in mind when you're spacing them out. This is part 7 in the Basics of Rod Building series, and in this segment we will be binding the guides onto the blank. During the bind process we will need what's called a pull-through. Now you can buy pull-throughs, or you can just get some thin diameter braid, like a 10 to 15 pound braid, and tie a loop in it, about 10-15 centimeters long. Just make sure the loops you've tied it, put plenty of knots in there to keep it nice and tight, and we'll be using that to finish off the bind. You will also need some binding thread. Now I've attached the binding thread onto a thread bobbin. Now this bobbin, there are many different ways you can apply tension onto it while you're binding. The bobbin helps with that because it creates a weight so that when you let go it will keep the tension on the bind. Now to increase the tension of that bobbin, you can wrap it around one of the arms of the bobbin twice, like I've done here, before you thread it through the actual pipe. I'll also be using some clippers, and I may need the thread picker if I need to pull out a thread. And there's a burnishing tool, which is basically for working the thread once you've bound it, just to flatten it out and even out the gaps. I'm going to change positions quickly so you can see over my shoulder. We are going to bind up that guide foot to the blank, and to do that we will start the bind at about 5 mil before the guide foot starts, and we will bind up the guide and to the shoulder. And to commence this, we will take some masking tape and tape the end of the thread to the blank above the guide. So we're going to bind that way, yet we're going to start by taping it above the guide. And then just loosely with big winds come down in the opposite direction to the way we want to bind. And right to there. So I want to start the bind about there. That's about 5 mil from the foot. So I will, at that point, I will square off the wrap, and I will pop over that thread. When I pop over the previous wrap, that actually locks that into place. And then I'll give it about half a dozen turns to keep that nice and locked in. So the other thing to keep in mind is that you want your binds to start very square on. So if you notice anything any bind that's not square, just use your fingernails and square that up, and that will set you up for a much neater bind. If you see here, there's just a little bit there where it's popped in, and I'll just pop it back out with my fingernail, and that will keep the rest of the bind nice and neat. Like so. The other thing to do is every few turns, just stop and tighten it up a little bit with your fingers or with a burnishing tool. Just give it a little squeeze, keep it all nice and bunched up. So I've probably done about 4 or 5 mil worth of binding there. So now I can actually release that tag and cut it off, because it will be locked in place by the first few turns that we did. So I will grab a blade, and to cut that off, I will just pull the tag end up and over that blade. By pulling the tag end up and over, then you don't have the risk of the blade cutting into your bind. You keep the blade nice and straight. Then you just continue to bind. Like so. So I'm putting tension on the thread with my fingers and pulling slightly backward. That way, as each bind is turned around the blank, I'm creating pressure between the bind that I'm pulling onto and the last bind, and it keeps them bunched up nice and tight. Also just stop every now and then, like I said, and give it a bit of a work it a little bit. Here we go, we're about to go up the ramp. This is where this transition as you start to go up the ramp of the foot of the guide. This is where the grinding the guide feet becomes very important. Now I've come up to the point where the tape is, and that's fine because there's plenty of bind on there holding that guide on now. So I can take that tape off without the guide falling off. So bound up now to about 5 mil before the end of the guide, or the shoulder of the guide here anyway. And now we need to start to plan the pull through. So this is how we end the bind. Okay, so now I'm going to insert the pull through braid. So the pull through braid loop, I'll insert under that last bind, so just under there. Now, so something to take note of, this is the loop end of the loop, and the knot end is over on this side. We're going to pull this pull through braid that way. So you don't want the knot on this side, you want the knot on this side so that the knot isn't going under your binds. It just makes it a little bit of a mess. So now I'll continue to bind over that pull through braid. Stopping occasionally to neaten up the bind. Now you don't want to bind up the shoulder of the guide. You want to bind all the way to the bottom, so all the way to where the shoulder starts, but not up the shoulder, because that's where you'll create a gap under your binding. So and it will be hard to fill that gap when you're trying to epoxy it. So just make sure that you go as far as you can without creating that gap. So I've probably got maybe another bind or two left before I start to go up the shoulder. There you go. So now I'm ready to cut the thread there and use the pull through to finish off the bind. So the trick here is we're going to insert it into the loop of the tag end, but the trick is to keep tension on the tag the whole time. So I've got tension on there with my thumb. Now I'm going to keep tension on this tag that I've got in my hand with this hand the whole time. And then I'll undo this end and I will pull the tag through just like that. Now I've pulled it through about 3 mils, and it's I've got about 5 or 6 mils between where the end of the bind and where the tag comes out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut about 1 mil off, which means that I will be able to pull that tag through, and that tag will actually finish under the bind and not be showing when it comes up. So now I'm going to grab the burnishing tool and I'm going to gently work up and down with the burnishing tool, not too hard because you don't want to damage the thread, but just to be able to spread out the thread and flatten it out a little bit so that if there are any gaps, you've covered them out and evened the spacings out. And there you have it. In the first demonstration, we did a single yellow bind all the way up the guide foot. Now I'm going to show you how to do a simple trim. So we're going to do a few mils of trim, of green, and then yellow for the rest of the guide. I've chosen those two colours just to make it easy for you to see. So the first thing we do is we start with the trim, and again, we tape it to the blank above the guide that we're binding. So we're binding in, if you're binding in this direction, you always tape the tag end above in the direction that you're binding. So nice big loose wraps, and then square it off about where you want to start binding. So in this case I'll start there, and I'll pop over the thread, the previous bind, just like so. So I'll just come over and then try to keep it straight from there. Again, just use the burnishing tool to straighten up that bind. Okay, so I've done about 4 mils of trim. Now I'm ready to start with the actual bind colour. So there's enough bind there to lock that in. You only need about 3 or 4 binds to actually lock it in. So I can release that. And I'll grab the blade, keep the blade flat, and pull the tag over the blade. So once you've cut that tag, now I'll start to do some loose binds forward, and we won't see that once we've completed the bind, but all I'm going to do is tape that to the blank and give that a snip. Now we're going to start the actual bind colour. So I'm starting with the yellow. So I'll tape that to the blank again, above the guide in the direction that we're binding. Head back down to where we want to start. And what I'll try and do is align where this bind starts. So I'll pop over that. See here, that's where that bind kind of ended, because I started to come out at an angle. So I'll try and pop over that, lock in that bind right there where it started to deviate from the main bind. There you go. So now I've locked that off and I've started to bind square along the blank, across the blank. I've probably done half a dozen binds there. So I'm going to release that yellow tag, and I've got all, here we go. I'm going to release the green tag as well. So now I'll cut off that green tag just by pulling on the tag and keeping the blade flat so that you don't cut the bind. Now I could probably cut that tag now anyway, the yellow one, but I prefer just to leave it in there for another few binds just to make sure that there's no risk of it coming loose later. I find that if the tag that you're binding over is nice and square, nice and straight, then it makes for a neater bind. Okay, I've well and truly done enough binds to lock that in. So now, again, scalp a blade, hold it flat so you don't dig into your bind, pull with the tag end, and there you go. Now I'm free to keep binding. Now we're ready to start to prepare for the end of the bind by putting the pull through in. Now remembering that this pull through is a loop of braid like that. I'm going to pull that through that way, so I'm going to leave the knot on this side. I'll just tape it to the blank. And pop it under this last bind. And then I'll just keep wrapping. So again, you want to bind all the way to the start of the shoulder of the guide. So by the shoulder I mean this section here. You want to go right into the corner, but you don't want to come up this ramp. The important thing here is the moment that you cut this tag end, that you maintain tension on the thread to stop it from coming undone. So I'll cut it, but I will keep tension on it with my hand. Just pull it through and keep that tension. Now with the other hand, I'm going to pull this tag end like so. So I've pulled that in a few mil, and then I'm going to cut that tag end just before, maybe another mil outside, so that I can, and the idea is that it's probably into about there is where the the end of the pull through is. So by the time I pull that through with the pull through, there'll be no tag sticking out. Like so. So that's the bind, and now just work it a little bit with the burnishing tool to spread out the bind and flatten out the thread a little bit. You don't overwork it too much or you'll damage the surface of the thread. Neaten up the ends. Make sure they're nice and square. And there you have it. So, the few things to keep in mind when you're doing your binds. As you do each guide, you want to review them and make sure that the size of the trim is always the same on each one, and that the distance from the guide foot, from the start of the guide foot, is the same on each guide. Now, ideally, you'd start about 5 mil from the start of the guide foot. Here I've started about 10 mil, just so I can spend a bit more time showing you how to put the trim in. But 5 to 6 mil is fine. You don't want one guide to have a 10 mil lead, and then the next guide to have a 5 mil lead. It just won't look right. So as you go through, keep that in mind, and it will save you having to redo binds later on. Okay, so we've done the first bind, and we've affixed the tip to the end of the rod, and now we would typically go and do the rest of the guides before we align them. We look at the hoods on the reel seat and we align the guides to the hoods. So you want the guide, when you look down the blank, you want them to all be perfectly in line with the hoods. These are the hoods here. That's the side of the reel seat that your reel will be sitting on. So when I look down this one, it's about 3 degrees to the right, so I'm just going to give it a little bit of a gentle nudge and encourage it to move over a little bit. And there you go. That one's nice and straight now. And I would then do that to each other guide as well. Once you've done that, then we're ready to apply epoxy to the binds. This is part 9A in the basics of rod building, and in this segment we're going to prepare for putting the epoxy on the guides. Before we get started, I'm going to pop the rod into the drying machine, and what this does is it rotates the rod very slowly at about 7 to 9 revolutions per minute, and that is the perfect speed for us when we're applying the epoxy. So I put the butt end of the rod into the chuck jaws, and you hold there are 2 face plates here, and you hold one still and you turn the back one, and that closes the jaws onto your rod butt, and then there's a lock behind the second plate, and you spin that clockwise and that locks it into the butt. And the second step, I'll get that out of the way. The second step is to adjust the height of this rod stand so that your rod's nice and straight. And you drop, so you raise the 2 bottom rollers and you drop the top one and lock it into place, and you turn it on with the red button at the back, and the rod's ready for applying epoxy. So to get started, I'm going to mix the Superior Finish Crystal Clear Coat in a mixture of 2 to 1. It's pretty easy to remember. It's twice the volume of the big bottle as the little bottle. So I'm going to make a mixture of 3 mils out of A and 1.5 mils out of B. Here we have both part A and part B of the epoxy in the measuring cup. Before I started mixing, I gave the mixture a 5-second blast with a heat gun on medium heat from a distance of about 25 centimeters. This reduces the viscosity of the epoxy, which helps the two parts mix and also helps release bubbles. I'm mixing the epoxy with a pedal pop stick split lengthways into two pieces. By reducing the width of the pedal pop stick, you also minimize the number of bubbles that you introduce into the epoxy. Set your timer and very slowly mix the epoxy for a full 5 minutes. Keep the end of the pedal pop stick on the bottom of your cup the whole time that you're mixing the epoxy. This also reduces the amount of air bubbles you introduce into the epoxy. Remember, mix very slowly. I've been mixing this batch for exactly 5 minutes, and now I'm going to pour the epoxy into a foil cupcake pan and then let it settle for just 1 minute before I start using it. At this point, if you have too many bubbles, you can give it another 5 seconds with a heat gun, again on medium heat at a distance of about 25 centimeters. But only do this if it's absolutely necessary. Superior Finish has a working time of about 25 minutes at 25 degrees Celsius. Applying heat like we did at the start of mixing can be a useful tactic when mixing epoxy and also for finishing the epoxy on the bind. But be really careful not to apply too much heat, as it will also reduce the working time of the epoxy. This is part 9B in the basics of rod building. In this segment, we are going to apply the epoxy to the guides. To start off with, I'll just grab, using a sable brush, grab a fair chunk of epoxy and apply it onto the binds. It's okay to put a little bit too much on, you can always wick it off later. One thing to keep in mind is that we're not painting it on, we're just spreading it out by using the roll of the blank and just moving the brush from side to side. Once you've got a bit on there, then I'll look to make an edge on the bind furthest away from the guide. And when I say an edge, you want the epoxy to come over the bind by about 1 mil or 1 to 2 mils, and you want to take care with that because you want a nice clean edge. It'll really stand out if you've got an uneven edge. And you're just using the bow wave of the epoxy, not necessarily the bristles itself of the brush. Just like so. And then just work it up. Now if you have bubbles in the epoxy, don't stress. What we can do later is just hit it quickly with a heat gun and that'll lift those bubbles out. So now I'm going to put an edge on the other side of the bind. Okay, now what you want to do is on this side, on this side of the guide underneath, there's going to be a little gap there and you need to get epoxy into that gap. So Trying to get my hand in the camera. Just slow the blank down, hold it just momentarily with your hand, and you'll be able to squeeze the brush in from an angle and just get some epoxy in behind that. Not too long, then just let go and let it keep spinning. So now I've got enough epoxy on there, I just need to work it across back and forth to spread it out and keep it even. Now what you're looking for, you need a lot of light when you're doing this because it's very easy for the little imperfections to be hidden. So imperfections can look like, if there's not enough epoxy on a section, you'll see the grain of the thread, and sometimes it's hard to see, and then once it dries you'll notice it. The other thing you're looking out for are little hills and valleys where the epoxy hasn't spread evenly, or and needs a little bit of massaging to encourage it to lay nice and flat. Now I like to do 2 coats. This is a high build epoxy, the Superior Finish Crystal Clear Coat. One coat should be suffice so long as you put enough on there and you haven't got any grains of thread showing. Personally, I like to come back and have another go and just give it a second coat. But if it's your first rod or you're a shorter time, so long as it's got good coverage, 1 coat's enough. I'll grab the heat gun and just give it a quick hit, and that will loosen up that epoxy and help any air bubbles that are in there come out. So you just turn the heat gun onto medium, and you want it to be at a distance where it actually doesn't hurt your own skin to apply the heat. So, and I'll just give it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1 rotation, and the whole time I'm spreading the heat across so that it's not fixated, so it's not concentrated in one area. And there you have it. So that will take about 4 hours to dry at about 25 degrees Celsius, and you'll leave it in the rod dryer the whole time.